In 2014, a man named Ethan and his wife, Danny, were spending a weekend together on Vancouver Island, which they had done many times before. The couple had a lot of experience on the island and camping in general. Vancouver Island provides an optimal camping setting because of its mix of scenic beaches and dense forests. The couple had many successful camping trips on the island until something truly terrifying happened to them on their final outing. On the island, Ethan and Danny were far from any roads or civilization, enjoying the solitude. They set up camp on a beach, a good distance from anywhere, and kept a fire going. To get to the trail leaving the beach was 1 kilometer along the beach and 2 kilometers to the road through the forest. The couple had met another camper, named Leon from New Zealand, who they ran into earlier that day on the beach. Leon was planning on sleeping in his van, which he parked back up on the road. The couple invited him down to the beach for a fire, and the three shared a bottle of wine and talked amongst themselves around the fire. This is where things started to get a little creepy. The sun was starting to go down by this point, and the trio kept hearing what sounded like female voices from behind them in the bushes dividing the beach from the forest. It wasn't too dark out yet, so it was still possible that they were just other hikers or campers nearby, or even a group who anchored offshore, and the sound was just bouncing in a weird way. All three of them agreed they were hearing female voices. On that note, it was getting late and a little dark, so Leon said goodbye and set out to hike back to his car before it was too dark. Ethan and Danny stayed by their campsite and stoked the fire because Danny was starting to get creeped out by the voices, which continued on into the darkness. It sounded like 2 female voices speaking, but whatever was being said was unintelligible. It sounded to the couple like the voices were not far beyond the tree line. They stayed up very late tending to the fire, and only when the voices had finally stopped did they decide to put out the fire and go to sleep in the tent. Before doing so, the two scanned the cove with a flashlight several times, looking for boats that could have been the source of the talking, but there was nothing in sight. It was around 3 a.m. when they finally laid down, ready to catch some sleep. But about 15 minutes after they laid down, Ethan and Danny heard footsteps in the area around their campsite, over by where the fire was. The footsteps came from the direction of the bushes toward the inland behind them, a direction that was not traversable by people. The couple lay there, hoping it was just a bear or any animal, because the only bears on the island are black bears, which are usually very timid around people. The footsteps went from the fire, then over to the tent, then back into the woods. 5 minutes later, the footsteps came back again to the fire, and now, clear as day, there were 2 female voices talking gibberish very loudly. Their communication did not resemble any language known to Ethan or Danny, and they seemed to be talking over each other, having what could barely be considered a conversation at full volume in the dead of night, very far away from civilization, without using lights to navigate through the dense brush relatively quietly in a direction that seemed impossible to traverse on foot. The 2 voices moved from the fire pit area over to the tent, still talking at a loud volume. They stood over the tent, talking for a few seconds, then went completely silent. They went back into the woods, never to be seen or heard again. Ethan and Danny lay there, completely frozen and afraid for a long time. They woke up around 11 a.m. the next day because of how late they had fallen asleep. They packed up first thing and never returned. The couple probably made the best decision to remain quiet in the tent, not drawing attention to themselves from whoever or whatever was outside. This happened about a year ago on a camping trip to Kentucky in the winter. My girlfriend at the time and 3 of my buddies spent a long weekend hiking and camping. We drove in on a Friday night around midnight and set up camp. There was almost no one else at the campsite, besides a young couple a bit down the road from us and an older man down the road the other way. We unloaded the cars in the dark, got the headlamps out, and started setting up the tents. All of a sudden, my girlfriend noticed that we had an extra person amongst us. It was the young woman from the couple at the campsite down the road. She looked really messed up. Her eyes were glazed, and her skin looked like she had been picking at it constantly. She introduced herself and spoke in a sort of monotonous way. Overall, she seemed nice, but it was her boyfriend or husband who really creeped us out. We noticed after talking with her for a bit that he was standing near our campsite at the edge of the woods just staring at us. Eventually, he went back to their campsite, but then got in his car and pulled right up to us with his high beams on. As you can imagine, getting blasted by high beams at midnight in the middle of the woods really impairs your ability to see. His girlfriend said that she had to go, and she got into the car with him. At this point, we were all weirded out but not freaked out. It was later in the night when things got scary. I was in the tent with my girlfriend when I started to hear a domestic argument from the couple down the road. It soon escalated to full screaming. Then I heard the sound of glass breaking. At this point, we were all sitting up deciding if we should do something. I heard someone get into the car. Then the car peeled out of the campsite and raced down the dirt road past our campsite, kicking up dirt and gravel against the side of our tent. The guy had apparently left his girlfriend in the campsite because we could hear her sobbing. My girlfriend and I started getting dressed so we could check out the situation, but the car came peeling back up the road and parked back at the campsite. Loud panicked shouting ensued, and we heard two clear pops that sounded exactly like gunshots. I remember the feeling of blood draining from my face. My girlfriend and I were basically frozen in our tent listening. Finally, to our great relief, we heard them both start arguing again. The argument settled down by about 4 in the morning, and we fell asleep. When we woke up, they were gone. I asked my buddies if they had heard what happened, and they said it had kept them up as well. We made breakfast and started packing up when the older man from the trailer walked over and started chatting with us. He seemed surprised that my girlfriend was with me and said something along the lines of, "You shouldn't have brought her. It's not safe for women here." Needless to say, we were officially creeped out, and we found a new area of the state park to stay. We found a lovely lakeside campsite the next night and enjoyed the rest of the trip, but we were certainly jarred by the encounters. I was in Washington State, spending several days backpacking through the national parks. I was already about 20 miles out from the nearest road, and for the first 2 days, I hadn't run into a single person. It was the beginning of fall, so the weather was a bit colder than most people would be okay with. Anyway, in the morning I got up and then headed out to the next campsite. It was 6 miles out. 4 hours into this walk, I suddenly heard footsteps ahead of me. I looked up and saw a man walking along the trail, going the opposite way as me. I wasn't really expecting to see anyone, but I smiled and nodded as he passed by. I noticed something really strange though. He had no backpack, no water bottle, literally nothing. He was just wearing a long-sleeve t-shirt and some old hiking pants. I even turned around to get another look at him because I was so confused. When I did, he happened to also glance back at me. To keep things from being weird, I just turned back around and continued walking. After getting some distance, I kind of forgot about it. I think I came up with the idea that he had a campsite nearby and was just going for a walk, but I also knew that no established camps were anywhere near there. Whatever the case, I didn't find it worth thinking about too much. The next several hours were difficult, but eventually, I made it to my campsite. It was empty with just one small spot for my tent to go on. It wasn't as great as I was hoping though. The view was supposed to be a lot better, but from the actual campsite, there wasn't really any view at all. It was kind of covered up by all the trees. The whole campsite really just felt like it was in the middle of a forest rather than on a mountaintop. I was rightfully exhausted though, and went straight away to setting up my tent and then relaxing while watching the sunset. As I sat there, I randomly heard a shuffling sound behind me. I turned and was completely stunned to see that same man I'd run into earlier. He still had no backpack or anything, but even more confusing was why he was at this campsite. He was walking in the complete opposite direction when I last saw him, and for him to get here now, he must have turned around pretty soon after running into me. As he walked up to the campsite, he didn't look at me, almost as if he was purposefully pretending that I wasn't there or that he couldn't see me. He went up to the other side of this small area we were in and sat down. No tent, no sleeping bag, no anything. Just sitting on the dirt and looking out into the forest. He was only 15 or so feet from me, but with him looking away, I was able to get a much better look at him. The man looked like he was in his late 30s, had a short scruffy beard and short brown hair. I couldn't help but feel really uneasy. Nothing about this was natural, and as the sun continued to set, it only made me feel even more unsafe. Who was this guy? And what the hell was he doing 25 miles out in the forest with no shelter, food, or water? About 30 minutes passed and he still didn't move. I decided that I couldn't stay there. I had nowhere else to really go, but I figured I just had to find some random spot and make sure he didn't follow me. I began taking down my tent and packing up, and it was only then that the man looked over at me. Once he did, he never looked away, and every time I looked at him, he was staring right at me. Once I got everything stashed in my backpack, I saw out of the corner of my eye that the man stood up. I began walking as fast as I could, hearing his footsteps following close behind me. I clutched my small knife tightly in my hands, unsure what was going to happen. After a minute, I looked back a few times, seeing him still following but getting further away. Then I took a risk. I veered off the trail and into the woods. It was pitch black by now, so I hoped he didn't see me and would just keep walking. Once I was maybe 20 feet into the woods, I leaned out behind a tree and waited. 30 seconds later, his footsteps came down the trail, but just as he was about to pass by, he stopped. I watched his figure in the dark, looking around as if he knew I wasn't on the trail anymore. Then he started yelling, trying to sound friendly, which made it even more disturbing. After 2 minutes, though, he stopped yelling. But instead of going back to the campsite, he walked straight into the woods on the other side of the trail. His figure disappeared, and the woods fell silent. I must have waited there for over an hour before finally getting up and making my way back. I forced my body to push through and skip the next campsite just to be safe. When I was back in town, I put in a report with the local police office. They never followed up with me, though. I don't know if that man was living out there or was trying to rob or kidnap people, or maybe even both, but I'm lucky to have gotten away when I did.